Hello class, I hope everyone is doing well today. When they start watching this video, we're going to start looking into a couple of these organelles that we've been learning about in more detail. And the first one we're going to look at is cell membrane. So, some questions just to get us thinking about cell membranes and what's the most important parts about them is what have we learned about them in the past? We've talked about cell membranes, and we've talked about different things like lipids and what a lipid's main function is. So I want to just tie back to what we've already learned. What have we learned about lipids? And then also, what part of the body is like the cell membrane? Can you guys think of what's the barrier of our body between what's on the inside and the outside? So when I think of this, I like to think of our skin, and we'll talk a little bit about that later today, but it helps me remember and understand a cell membrane to think about the skin on a human. So, by the end of today, hopefully we'll be able to describe the structure and function of a cell membrane, and then hopefully we'll also be able to draw and label a cell membrane. So that's the goals by the end of the day. We have a good video to describe what a cell membrane is. I have that linked in the Google Classroom as always. So let's start with some review. So we've learned before that a cell membrane is the barrier of the cell which controls what goes in and what goes out. And we also said that it was a lot like the door of the cell. So it's usually closed, but it would open up for certain people, or certain nutrients, I should say, and really protected the cell from the outside. Everything on the inside stayed on the inside, and everything on the outside stayed on the outside. We also learned about lipids, going back, I think, to Partial 1, where lipids are the barrier of cells, and they help with cell signaling and energy storage. So we'll look into a little bit more of that. And then the last thing I want you guys to remember is that our structure determines our function. So we're going to be talking a lot about different structures, and then we're going to talk about how those different structures help us learn, help us remember, help us know about the function of it. So I have some important vocab for us to go over, and even I think, fun way to work through them. So the idea is we have our new vocab words off on the left side. And this is just a Jamboard. We've seen Jamboards before, but I'm going to work through this with you guys. So we have homeostasis, hydrophobic, hydrophilic, and glycoprotein are important vocab words that I want us to go through. Our first one, let's pick, is water hating. So this is our definition. Water hating. So if we look at our root words, we see that these two words both have hydro in it. So hydro, and then we have two definitions that both have water in it. So we can assume, or we can determine that hydro must mean water, and then it's just determining what the end of the word means. So phobic means hating, so hydrophobic is water hating, hydrophilic is water fearing. So that leaves us with two extra terms that we want to learn. This is a glycoprotein, and this definition even has protein in it. So a glycoprotein is just a sugar protein, so it's a protein that is attached to a sugar, and then that must mean this last one, homeostasis, is keeping a healthy state. So we've seen, I think, hydrophobic and hydrophilic before. Glycoproteins are going to be important. We'll talk about those, and homeostasis is going to be very important when we talk about cell membranes. So just wanted to show you guys some of that, how those match up and line up. And then I'll just put those back for later. So those are important vocab. We'll go through them. Hydrophobic, water hating. Hydrophilic, water loving. Glycoprotein is a sugar protein, and then a homeostasis is keeping a healthy state. When we break this one down, homo means same and stasis means stable. So keeping the same, everything stable, everything the same. We're going to get into some of the structures. So there are three main structures that make up a cell membrane. The first one we've talked about when we talked about lipids, which is a phospholipid bilayer. So this is really important because it makes our membrane flexible. When we look at our phospholipid bilayer, we have our hydrophilic, we see that word that we just learned, water-loving polar heads, so everything that likes to be around water goes to the outside. And then we have hydrophobic, everything on the inside is hydrophobic, so those ones go to the inside, these tails. So we have what these heads are actually phosphate groups, and these tails are long chains of carbohydrates. We learned about carbohydrates before, so I'm just trying to refresh your memory and build on what we've already learned. Our second important structure are what are called transport proteins. So our transport protein helps transfer nutrients and molecules in and out of the cell. So we have, one important thing is that each protein is very specific for each molecule, and each molecule can only go into certain proteins. And then we have two main types. We have a channel protein and a carrier protein. And what that means is, as we can see in our picture, our channel protein works right here. This is almost like a tube. So it's a very specific tube that only lets these green little circles in and out, whatever this nutrient may be, but it's always open. So these are allow them to pass through at any time. These carrier proteins, however, though, need to come in and attach to a part of the protein. And we can see that in the middle it's attached. And then it gets released on the other side. So these carrier proteins usually require energy because you're actually moving something. And are also very specific. So these ones move and change. Our carrier proteins move and change, and our channel proteins are just there like a tube. So we have our proteins are a part of our cell membrane. So our first one is our cell membrane is made up of a lipid bilayer. Our second one is they have transport proteins. The third important structure are glycoproteins, which we just learned are sugar proteins. And these help in cell signaling. So these are interesting because the sugars stick to the outside of the cell while the protein stays in the middle of the membrane. So if we just had the sugar part, it would break off easier. So it's attached inside the cell membrane by these proteins, and then these proteins and sugars combined, glycoproteins, help tell all the other kind of cells what this cell is. So we can see this in our blood types. It's a great example when we talk about different blood types, and some of you may know your blood type as either group O, A, B, or AB. And all that's saying is these glycoproteins on the outside of our red blood cells are a little bit different. So the most complex one is our AB. We can see there's a bunch of different types of sugars. Our B and A are similarly complex, but just different types of sugars. And then our O is the simplest type. So each person has a different type of red blood cell, and it's just talking about the sugars on the outside of them. So finally, our functions. So we talked a little bit why they're important, but the biggest functions of our cell membrane are to provide a barrier of the cell, which we've talked about, and then also to maintain homeostasis. So when I like to think of this, homeostasis is how we prefer, what's the easiest way for us to live. So for our cells, everything's always working, but we want it to be working really well and smoothly. And so that's our homeostasis, is when everything's okay. When things get off our homeostasis, maybe a virus comes into the cell and a bunch of energy has to get, and energy and materials have to go towards fighting this virus. That's when we're off our homeostasis. This happens when we get sick too. So when we're doing good, we can wake up every day and we're feeling happy and have energy and can get through our day very, very easily. But when we're sick, we're not at homeostasis. We're maybe have a headache, maybe our throat hurts, maybe we're sleeping a lot more because we just don't have the energy. So our cell membrane helps control all of that. It helps make sure we have the right amount of nutrients inside the cell and keeps certain things outside. So I like to think of this a lot like our human skin works, because it keeps the important things in and the bad things out. Another important way that we maintain homeostasis as humans is through sweat. So when we get really hot, we start to sweat because our body likes to work at a very specific temperature, which is around 98 degrees Fahrenheit, or I think 36 degrees Celsius. And so when we get above that, we start to sweat, and then through our skin, we'll release water. And then as the water evaporates, as the water gets turned into a vapor, it cools us down. So this is actually a really unique thing that only a few mammals do, humans being the main ones that are able to sweat using their skin. So I was hoping we could draw our own little example of a cell membrane. So the important parts here, this isn't a great picture, I'm sorry about that, is we start with a phospholipid bilayer, and that's labeled here. This I would call a channel protein, so we have a protein going all the way through. This kind of protein is a little bit more in detail than we're talking about today, but then we have our glycoprotein. So we have a protein in the cell membrane and a sugar attached to the top of it. So it's important to have our lipid bilayer. They even labeled a hydrophilic head, hydrophobic tail, our glycoprotein, and then some kind of channel protein or carrier protein as well. So if you guys like to draw that in your notes, I think that would be great. I think that is all we have for today. So thank you guys. If you guys have any questions, as always, please let me know.